What an extraordinary April it has been. In April, May called a June election. Let me unpack that for you a little further. The UK Prime Minister Theresa May this week in April has called for an early general election. She wants to have it on the 8th of June. She's seeking a stronger mandate in talks over leaving the European Union. Also to cement her place in history as an elected Prime Minister. She got the job after David Cameron stood down. She wasn't elected to the office and she's looking for that level of credibility to give her the muscle she needs in order to take Britain out of the European Union without too much fuss, without too much fighting and without too much bother. This is the Moneymakers. I'm Bruce Whitfield. Tonight we will look at whether or not Britain's decision to call for a snap election is net positive for the UK as they negotiate Brexit and what impact it could have on investments if they end up with a hard Brexit as it is known. Joining us for this discussion is Deon, Chief Investment Officer at Credo Group in London. Your Prime Minister, Deon, calling an early election. She certainly does know how to catch people by surprise.
That is certainly the case. I think a lot of people were coming back from the Easter breaks and wanting to ease back into things, and then boom, first day back and the news breaks. So indeed it was a surprise, not only for me but for all and sundry, and you could see it in the sort of surprise reaction around the world.
Now, I know you're an investment specialist, you're not a political analyst, but this is a political masterstroke at a time where the opposition parties in the United Kingdom are probably at their weakest in more than a decade. I mean, this is Theresa May being the ultimate political opportunist, is it not?
Absolutely. I think when you say that at the weakest in more than a decade, I think that is an understatement. I think if you look at the state of the Labour Party, based on all the internal divisions, the polls that we've had ever since Jeremy Corbyn took over, the Labour Party is extremely weak, and I think there's very strong evidence that they are likely to be decimated in this election. Interestingly though, a party like the Liberal Democrats, who previously suffered in the last election and went down to something like 7 seats, in all likelihood they will now experience a resurgence, because to the extent that this election is being played out as a Brexit election, as opposed to a Brexit referendum which we had 12 months ago, they are taking a very clear stance that they are still the one pro-Europe party. And for people who want to voice the fact that they think that we should have remained, or if there's any hope of still remaining, the Liberal Democrats will take those votes, and they'll take a large number of those votes from the Conservative Party. So the Liberal Democrats are likely to have a resurgence, but the other opposition parties are certainly in disarray. I'll mention one more. UKIP, we had quite a few votes last time, although not many seats. They don't really have a case anymore because Brexit's happening, so their reason for existence is pretty much in doubt.
What about the Scottish nationalists? Nicola Sturgeon, who's very outspoken, wanting Scottish independence from the United Kingdom. She wants to remain part of the European Union. Theresa May is giving no quarter on that particular front. This is an opportunity for Nicola Sturgeon to, I mean, she's in control of a large part of Scotland, but to even grow that influence still further.
Yes, indeed, and we saw Sturgeon's reaction yesterday exactly, consistent with that. She has been fighting for the next referendum for Scotland to ultimately stay within the EU. She will latch onto this now as another opportunity to fight that case for her. That's what this election will be about. And time will tell exactly how successful she may be with that. But she's already quoted the fact that Theresa May has done a U-turn of note, which is true. I mean, on something like 6 or 7 occasions in the last 6 months, Theresa May and her advisors have denied that they will call a snap election, and then at the point where they realise that they've got the maximum opportunistic kind of time to do so, given the lead in the polls, they did so, and Sturgeon, I think, rightly latches onto that.
Okay, so Nicola Sturgeon stands as a potential beneficiary. The Liberal Democrats stand as potential beneficiaries for the regretters, the people who regret they either didn't vote or they maybe voted against their conscience or against their logic. This gives them an opportunity. How does this then affect Theresa May? Because she's taking a big gamble, just like David Cameron did before her, that she knows the outcome of this particular poll, or can give a best guess of this particular poll. David Cameron, the former Prime Minister, thought he understood the British public too. Clearly he didn't, and the polls were wrong there. What if Theresa May gets this one wrong?
Yes, I think that's ultimately the million-dollar question, and one will have to see whether the polls can be this far wrong again. If you look at the lead that she had in a poll that was published just on Monday, the lead was basically as much as the total Labour vote. So Labour were in the sort of low 20s, and Conservative was in the mid 40s. So it was basically double the Labour vote. It hasn't been, anything like this since the days of Margaret Thatcher. And I think she is simply gambling on the fact that those polls will be translated into the election results. I read the newspapers this morning, people are talking about a likely majority of as many as 100 or more seats. But I do think that it could play out a little bit differently. We've seen how unreliable polls are. You and I have discussed this before. And as I say, if people do go in large numbers to, for example, the Liberal Democrats, then who knows? You have to mix into that the sort of vagaries of constituencies and exactly how the mathematics of elections work. And relatively small swings in polls can ultimately translate into relatively large number of seats. We saw that the last election when the Tories surprisingly actually got an overall majority. Everybody, all the smart money was on a hung parliament, and it didn't happen. The polls were quite wrong, and they could be wrong again. So yes, it is a gamble. But I think Theresa May, in her mind, it's not such a big gamble, and that's why she's taking the opportunity right now.
And also, I mean, the fears around Brexit would be that it would be disastrous for the UK economy. It would trigger a recession. The UK has not seen this level of decent economic growth in years. Part of it possibly as a result of a more competitive global currency with the devaluation of the pound. But post-Brexit, Britain doesn't look nearly as awful yet as was feared 12 months ago.
That is true, Bruce, but I'll point out two things. One, you've mentioned it, the weaker currency clearly makes it a lot more competitive in terms of export markets, and we've seen that in the share prices of all those sort of exporting companies, and that's clearly been, the case. We saw it yesterday going in reverse, where the pound gaining something like 2%. A company like Anglo American, which exports around the world, has a share price that falls 5%. So we saw a little bit of that reversing yesterday. So that's the one point. But the other point, quite frankly, is we haven't had Brexit yet. So we'll only be able to understand and analyse those effects in a couple of years' time, after we've had Brexit. So we've known about Brexit for some time, and it's introduced uncertainty, and it's introduced all sorts of speculation, certainly. But in terms of hard economic numbers, the real impact of Brexit lies in the future.
Is Theresa May driving a petrol tanker at full speed down a one-lane road blindfolded as she goes towards Brexit?
Yeah, I think those are strong terms. That may be a way of putting it. She'll defend it and say that's what the British people wanted, that's what they voted for. Ultimately, I think the very interesting question is the way that the markets seem to have interpreted this in the last 24 hours. People are seeing the election coming. People are speculating that this will, in all likelihood, lead to a softer Brexit, which then translates ultimately into a stronger pound. And that seems to be the consensus story 24 hours after the announcement. The question is ultimately, as far as I'm concerned, how likely that is. Theresa May, in everything that she said since the day she took over as Prime Minister, has seemed like a relatively hard Brexiteer, in spite of the fact that she notionally campaigned for the Remain side, clearly as part of the government going into the referendum last year. And I'm not sure that when she has the stronger mandate that she thinks she's going to get, that I guess she's likely to get in the election, why that will change overnight. People are saying that maybe the voices of some of the anti-Europe backbenchers will be quietened if there's a bigger number of Tories in the House. That could be the case. But by the same token, those that are pro-Europe, those voices could be diluted as well. So if I just look at what Theresa May herself said, as I say, she's always sounded like a hard Brexiteer. In her statement yesterday, if you go and analyse the numbers, she talks about the UK charting its own way. She's talking about the fact that we are free to control our own laws and our own borders, and to strike deals with old friends and new partners. Those are all sort of the semantics of a pretty hard Brexit line still.
I mean, and also it's not necessarily all up to her, of course, because the European Union has come out with a statement today as well, saying the real Brexit negotiations will happen after the UK elections. They're keeping their powder dry because they run the risk, as we've discussed in the past as well, of course, of a potential swing to the right, although Marine Le Pen in France is facing an uphill battle to try and win the presidential elections there. She does face an uncertain future. The Europeans could hold the trump cards in this one.
Well, I think the Europeans hold the trump cards anyway, because they are the vast majority. They have a very strong case, and ultimately this was always going to take a few months until we saw the next step going. If one focuses on where we are on the calendar now, with the elections in France coming up, as you mentioned, and then not long after that, effectively, Europe sort of stopping the clocks for a summer holiday. So we were always going to wait for some months before we saw proper progress on this front, probably until the autumn, sort of August, September in all likelihood. So that's 5 months away still, and by then we will have this additional bargaining chip, which is the election result. Now, I do think that, as cynical as one might want to be, regardless of exactly the way that Theresa May ends up playing her hand after the election, and assuming she does get the strong majority that people are expecting, I do think that will go some way towards addressing uncertainty in the markets, and I do think that at the negotiation table, when she arrives there, that will make her a more credible counterparty than this unelected leader who just happened to be there when the previous one stepped down. So I think from that perspective, it is indeed a positive.
Great analysis. Thank you, Deon Gouws, Chief Investment Officer at Credo Group in London. Big geopolitical issues around at the moment, of course, all having an impact not only on their domestic markets, but also on global sentiment. We will have to watch this story very, very closely indeed. South Africa's got a long and quite patchy trading history and partnership with the United Kingdom. Brexit may very well change that for the better. Time will tell. Till next time, thank you so much for watching The Moneymakers. From us, good night.